Welcome and thank you for joining us today for DevOps and Continuous Delivery, 10 Trends Shaping Application Delivery in the Enterprise. My name is Raleigh Gould and I will be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Julie Craig, Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. Julie has over 20 years of experience in software engineering, IT infrastructure engineering, and enterprise management. At EMA, Julie's focus areas include DevOps, application performance and availability management, application discovery and dependency mapping, software development, and software as a service. And before I hand things over to Julie, I did want to thank the sponsors of her DevOps and Continuous Delivery research. They are Cloudbees, CompuWare, and New Relic. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Julie Craig. Julie?
Hello, everybody. As business dependence on software grows, enterprise IT is undergoing a profound shift. Once relegated to developing and delivering back-office systems with low rates of change, many leading IT departments are now releasing new code to production many times each week. Earlier this year, I decided to explore this transformation with a research survey on DevOps and continuous delivery. In the next few minutes, I'll tell you about our findings. Before I start, however, I did want to take a moment to add my thanks to Raleigh's and thank our research partners for this project. Cloudbees, CompuWare, and New Relic have each contributed to making this research a reality. So, as all of you know, software is everywhere. It not only runs in the enterprise, it controls automobiles, communication systems, trains, boats, planes, virtually everything we touch these days. IT organizations are evolving from delivering the relatively static systems of the past to delivering dynamically changing, interactive application environments. DevOps and continuous delivery are key enablers for this transition. During the next few minutes, I'll give you some background on this research, including who we surveyed and why. Although the survey itself was quite long and it's impossible to cover all the findings in a short half hour, I've picked out a few key topics which I found particularly interesting, and hopefully they'll be of interest to you as well. So to start out, you've probably realized by now that while DevOps and continuous delivery are terms used by virtually every vendor, each vendor defines them differently. EMA uses the terms probably more broadly than many definitions you've heard in the past, basically as broad concepts versus specific products. DevOps, for example, typically has an enterprise connotation. Modern application ecosystems are tremendously complex, and most organizations are finding that they need cross-functional teams to support them. DevOps practices facilitate collaboration and, from the EMA or enterprise management perspective, apply across the life cycle. In contrast to DevOps, continuous delivery may have an enterprise, manufacturing, or independent software vendor connotation. This term describes an iterative life cycle focused on accelerating delivery of software, usually in smaller increments. Now, while the two don't necessarily go hand in hand, there is a natural fit in the enterprise. And for this reason, this survey specifically focused on DevOps and continuous delivery from the enterprise perspective. EMA takes a life cycle approach to DevOps, as I mentioned briefly. We see each stage as an iterative life cycle within a life cycle, since this is the reality within most development and operations organizations. For example, software design tends to evolve iteratively with input from business stakeholders over time. Code is also developed iteratively, since testing and user acceptance can both send a given piece of code back through the development process. Even production support, which I've shown in this graphic as the managed stage, has its own iterations. Applications are continually monitored on an ongoing basis, and if necessary, they're sent back to other stages of a life cycle for bug fixes or modifications. There's an organizational aspect to this life cycle as well. Each stage requires some combination of development, operations, and business knowledge to complete. Now, when you bring continuous delivery into the mix, it may not be a coincidence that when we look at DevOps from the lifecycle perspective, it provides an ideal backbone for continuous delivery as well. The reality is this: software delivery cannot be accelerated unless every stage of the undergoing life cycle is also accelerated. So from the enterprise perspective, strong DevOps practices and a life cycle approach should increase the velocity of software delivery while also improving overall quality. And that is pretty much the position that I've taken, not only in this particular research, but also similar research I did about a year ago on DevOps. Now, in doing this study, our goal was to pick the brains of enterprise IT professionals who self-identified as being from companies engaged in either DevOps or continuous delivery practices. The goals were to identify their key challenges and to assess the business outcomes of these practices. In addition to being from companies doing either DevOps or continuous delivery, all respondents were actively involved in either delivering applications themselves or managing those who are. Since I also wanted to assess the correlation between these practices and revenue growth, the respondents also needed an understanding of their company's budgets and revenues. So as you can see, this was quite a select group of people. You know, it wasn't just folks that, maybe knew something about IT. It had to be people who specifically were professionals who were focused on applications at some point in the life cycle. So, which of the results did I find particularly interesting? Well, I have more than 10 slides here because some of the results are kind of two parts. But at a high level, one of the things that really interested me was that within this select group, 96% had cross-functional IT teams. Now, whether you want to call them DevOps teams or not, these are teams of people that have both development and operations skills. In many cases, they might have network skills as well, and they are called different things in different companies. Application management teams seems to be a common name, infrastructure services. But regardless, they are groups of people who do have skills pretty much across the IT spectrum. Now, in quarter 3 of 2014, I did research on application performance management, asked a similar question, and at the time, approximately 80% of a less DevOps-centric group of respondents answered in the affirmative to this question. At that time, about 60% identified these teams as being dedicated versus ad hoc. So these are full-time people who basically are cross-functionally managing application support. So clearly the respondents to this survey understand the value proposition of cross-functional collaboration, and I think they were pretty optimal in terms of answering the kinds of questions that I needed to have answered. In addition, approximately 15% of this group define the DevOps role as operating across the full life cycle, as we do here at EMA. As you can see from this slide, this definitely was not the most common approach. Most see code check-in as the point where DevOps teams come into play. Which stands to reason, because I think traditionally that has probably been the case. And we also see quite a number of vendors promoting this perspective, particularly those who focus on the deployment stage of the life cycle. EMA sees this viewpoint evolving more towards a life cycle approach as more companies start to make the link between a DevOps-driven life cycle and accelerated software delivery. So, subsequent research will prove whether that hunch is true or whether it isn't. DevOps isn't without its challenges, the primary one appearing to be delivery speed, although not by, a tremendous number percentage points. In terms of speed, businesses expect IT to be agile. However, software development takes a long time. Other top challenges include troubleshooting of complex software systems and finding ways to improve interactions between development and operationally trained people. Oddly enough, management support of cross-functional work comes in as the number 4 challenge. As we'll see in a few minutes, the business benefit of these cross-functional interactions are very compelling. For this reason, I also believe it's likely that this finding will change over time as more IT executives begin to link DevOps with the potential business outcomes and benefits. One of my objectives in doing this study was to uncover the links, if there are any, between DevOps and revenue. And for me, this slide pretty much puts those questions to rest. It shows a crosstab combining business revenue growth with the quality of the day-to-day interactions between Dev and Ops. In other words, how positive are the interactions between development and operational teams. The specific questions are actually shown underneath the graphic. This crosstab shows a clear, overwhelmingly positive relationship between the two. 87% of companies whose development and operations interactions were rated as above average or excellent saw revenue growth of at least 10% last year. In contrast, only 13% of those reporting average or poorer interactions reported similar revenue growth, and many actually reported revenue decreases. The delta between the two numbers is so overwhelming that it's difficult to refute. Apparently, practices which promote collaborative bridges across development and operational silos deliver measurable revenue-related business benefits. I also wanted to find out what continuous delivery really means in modern organizations. What do IT organizations mean when they say, yes, we are doing continuous delivery? Here we see that 40% of companies practicing continuous delivery have actually increased code delivery frequencies by at least 10% in the past year, which is actually pretty good. For the companies which have done so, this means increased business agility. But the converse is also true for companies who have not managed to increase the speed at which they're delivering code. basically, for them, it means that competitors are rolling out new products and services to customers faster than they can do, and also faster than competitors did a year ago. So there's kind of a race going on here. I've been talking about technology haves and have-nots for some time, and it appears that that race is that there's even more of a gap between those two, and that it's very important to deliver these new applications and services to the business, because that literally is what customers today expect. So what does 10% faster mean? Well, more than 70% report weekly or more frequent code releases, so at least weekly, and in many it's daily or multiple times a day. Compared to the quarterly or twice yearly releases, which were the norm even two or 3 years ago, this rate of change can only really be described as extraordinary. And since change has traditionally been the enemy of IT operations teams, it's little wonder that DevOps practices have matured exponentially in this time as well. Well-developed processes combined with cross-functional collaboration start to be your best friend as application ecosystems grow more complex and more dynamic, and definitely more difficult to manage once they get into production. Continuous delivery also has its challenges, but there doesn't seem to be a single overwhelming smoking gun here. While testing is again a primary concern, even in these relatively mature companies, we still see a host of organizational challenges. In fact, organizational factors seem to be impacting delivery frequencies as often as the speed or lack of it of software development. So, and that's saying quite a bit, because as I mentioned previously, software development is does tend to be quite a long, laborious process. So almost half and half in terms of what is impacting the speed of software delivery. The good news is that continuous delivery also seems to correlate with revenue. Again, the positive correlation is quite dramatic, even more so than the correlation we saw between DevOps and revenue growth. 93% of those companies reportedly engaged in continuous delivery experienced revenue growth of 10% or higher last year. Only 7% of the non-continuous delivery companies reported that degree of success. Now, these numbers might be skewing a trifle high because, remember, all of the folks that completed this survey, their companies were doing at least one of DevOps or continuous delivery. Some were doing both. But that being said, probably a less homogeneous group, it would come out maybe not this high, but fairly similar. And to me, these numbers pretty much say it all in terms of the relationship between revenue, continuous delivery, and DevOps. Definitely beneficial to the business bottom line. In another validation of the need for speed, this slide highlights the impact of delivery frequency on revenue. So this is how often we're actually delivering and what the impact is on revenue. Of those companies which increase the frequency of code delivery by 10% or more, as I cited on a previous slide, more than 60% saw revenue increases of 10% or more. What may be even more noteworthy, however, is the converse. 75% of those that did not increase their delivery frequencies by the same amount saw less revenue growth and more revenue decreases. So there appear to be a number of takeaways from the portions of the survey dealing with revenue. One is that IT can no longer be viewed as a cost center that's disconnected from the business, because it can potentially be a definite boon and business enabler. In the overwhelming majority of cases, Dev and Ops teams, empowered by their management and by their tool sets, can indeed deliver impressive business value. So mostly, so far, I've looked at the positive side of the equation. Let's take a few minutes to look at the negative side. While continuous delivery clearly benefits the business, it takes its toll on IT. 45% of the respondents said that development is drawn into production support more often, and 30% report a higher number of performance or availability problems, and these are for those companies doing continuous delivery. In fact, almost half say both Dev and Ops are being drawn into application support more often, and sometimes even at the expense of their own core responsibilities. For example, development teams spend approximately equal amounts of time developing software and managing software already in production. Now, taking a minute to consider the enormous revenue potential I've already talked about of increasing the velocity of software delivery, this appears to be counterproductive. You know, what would happen if these teams could actually spend more time creating software and less time supporting software? Likewise, operations teams spend 10% more time monitoring applications and 5% more time troubleshooting applications than they do administering servers and networks. Obviously, delivery frequency could be accelerated even more, again, by enabling development and operations organizations to focus on their core roles versus focusing on activities aimed at simply keeping the lights on. So what's the answer? Well, as you can probably guess, I'm a firm believer in the value of enterprise management tools. Many DevOps and continuous delivery-related tasks can be automated, and every automation investment frees up IT specialists for work that can add business value. As an example, like many of you, I often multitask. Putting one task on autopilot means that I can allocate more bandwidth to tasks which do require my time and attention. In a way, tools enable IT specialists to do something similar. The findings highlighted here clearly illustrate that the benefits of DevOps and continuous delivery practices can directly impact the business bottom line. They also demonstrate that IT organizations engaged in these practices are making a difference for their companies. At the same time, as we've seen, these practices can adversely impact the workloads of both DevOps and operations. Now, everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too. Everybody wants to, be able to save money and not have to invest in tools, and also have the kind of revenue growth I've talked about here. But the challenge is to free up Dev and Ops to do what they're best at, to enable them to deliver the business benefits that I've actually discussed today. Once skilled people are hired and strong processes are in place, the role of tools is twofold. First, to automatically perform those tasks which can be offloaded, and to do them faster and probably more efficiently and more accurately than people can. Second, to do so by instantiating and automating existing processes to make sure processes are in place that are approved by the enterprise. Research studies such as this one help clarify the factors contributing to business success through technology. In this case, automation can be a key foundation for companies seeking to make the transition towards DevOps and continuous delivery. Now, that concludes my presentation for today. Raleigh, I'm not sure what our time looks like. If we have any questions, and we could certainly, I think, have a couple of minutes here for Q&A.
Yes, we do have time for a couple of questions. You can log those in the Q&A panel if you have some questions for Julie. Julie, let's jump right into the questions. The first one is, why do you think software integration testing tops the tools wish list?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not sure how many folks on the webinar are developers or have been involved in software development, but integration testing is actually where the code you're working on is tested against the other existing systems within your enterprise. Today's applications are highly integrated. I've talked with folks who are integrating Salesforce.com. They might have, a couple of them I've talked to have more than 200 integrations running just to this cloud platform, and that could very well be true of on-premise platforms as well. These are among the most difficult types of applications to test. And, there are some products emerging on the market that do cover that space, and I think that, one of the reasons why folks are looking for those kinds of tools is because it's hard. Hopefully, as time goes on, those functions will be more automated, and there will be less difficulty with that particular, with those particular issues.
Great, thank you, Julie. Let's take one more question. This audience member said, I'm surprised that the correlation between continuous delivery and revenue growth is not stronger. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, I actually thought when I looked at those numbers, I thought that they were pretty strong. Once you get into the 80s or 90s, that's a pretty good correlation from my perspective. As to why they weren't stronger, I can't say. One thing is that, there are some companies that, sort of take they kind of lick their finger and hold it up to the wind and take a wild guess, as opposed to doing any real, metric-driven types of quantification. I think that might be one factor. But basically, if I were a CIO and I saw numbers like what I saw in this research, I think I would be, at least certainly well disposed towards looking at continuous delivery as an option.
Great. Thank you, Julie. And I wanted to thank today's audience for joining us. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Enterprise Management Associates tomorrow that will include the on-demand playback of today's webinar, as well as some additional resources. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.